My son asked me a question as I was preparing for my presentation. He said, "Mom, if you're a private investigator, why are you sharing your stories?" The first thing that I had to learn as a private investigator was how to ask questions. And I'm going to tell you a story, and Mark didn't sit me down and, on a blackboard explain how to ask questions. He told me a story, and I'm going to share it with you, your first story of the day. So we're going to go over the characteristics of a sociopath. A sociopath and somebody with sociopathic tendencies are very different. Somebody with tendencies may be a compulsive liar. They may be manipulative and intelligent, impulsive, and charming. But when you look at this list, and I'm going to go through it, charming, impulsive, intelligent, manipulative, narcissistic, require stimulation, that can explain their crime sprees, and compulsive liar. If you know somebody who's charming, impulsive, and intelligent, they're not a sociopath, and they don't have sociopathic tendencies. We're going to talk about lying. Why do we lie? Why do we lie? We all do it. Everybody lies. Who lies more, men or women? By a raise of hand, who thinks men lie more? Drum roll, please. I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation. Let's say we're in a mall, and there's a big crowd forming, and there's police officers and mall detectives, mall security that are running to this big crowd. And let's say I walk up to you dressed as I am like this, and I say, "Detective Ring, I need to ask you some questions. Please come with me." And let's say I flash this badge. Okay, this is a real badge. This is my badge. What would you do? What would you do? You would comply, because that's what people do. But you know what? This is a badge that I used once upon a time. It's unethical for a private investigator to walk around wearing a badge that looks like a police badge. So I don't know. Has anybody heard the myth? I say myth, that when you look up to the left, you're thinking about a lie. It's a myth. We don't, at least in my industry, we don't do it. He was from a small rural area about 90 miles southwest of St. Louis called Richwoods, Missouri. And when it was official that he was missing and there was foul play involved, I went down there immediately. So did the FBI. We got down there, and I was able to have my own personal, private meeting with the parents, with his mother and stepfather. And then I joined the search party. Now, people are very curious about how a search party works. Search party works where you get all your volunteers, the more the merrier, and it's very different when you're in a rural area than when you're in the city. You stand about so far away from each other, about 5 feet away from each other, and on the word go, you're going to walk straight. When you're working in a rural area, you are going to run into fences, barbed wire fences, and ditches. When you run into a fence, you got to climb over it. When you run into a barbed wire fence, you got to climb under it. When you run into a ditch, I hate to say, but this is the most exciting part of being on a search party, you got to go around it. But before you can go around it, you've got to look at all the debris that you find in the ditch, because there always is something. This was the highlight of my career that took place 17 years ago. It was in 2000, it was featured on news, radio nationwide. In 2004, it was featured on a series of Lifetime television called Final Justice. I ran a criminal background check on the 2 nurses that had been in the apartment that week and found a history of stealing on one of them. Problem was solved. I wanted to solve this case. As I began, I considered the security features on the building. Anybody could potentially enter. All an intruder had to do was wait for the door to open and walk right in, or call any tenant in the building and pose as a utility company or a repair service. The last thing I wanted to do was accuse the man I loved of stealing. But I was secretly doubting him, and it was breaking my heart, because if it was right, if I was right, it meant that all of my dreams were being shattered. I didn't want it to be true, but I couldn't ignore my instincts, my intuition. So I put my fiancé under investigation for the next week and managed to keep him away from my family. But what stuck with me the most was that he had stolen firearm, which meant he had stolen guns. He impersonated a police officer and resisted arrest. This meant that he was bold and dangerous and maybe armed. I didn't know. He had nothing to lose but his freedom, a freedom that meant very little based on his record. And if caught, he would go away for a very long time. It felt like my whole world was falling apart in an instant. Imagine, if you can, the person you are in love with and planning on spending the rest of your life with looks you dead in the eyes and says, "April Fools." And that my determination to catch him was much stronger than his fight was about to end. But in order to make this happen, I had to go undercover. I felt guilty for what I was about to. Before I realized I was in love with someone who did not exist, and that everything that came out of his mouth was just a bouquet of lies. I chose to use my experience to educate and inform. As a crime victims advocate, it is my hope that others can learn from my experience, which one day might prevent another statistic. Thank you.